Hey, Dr. Stein here from Straight Ahead Chiropractic. I'm going to do a little bit of a different video than we normally do. I want to talk more specifically about the degenerative processes that happen in the spine. And knowing that our specialties in pediatrics and pregnancy, really this is why we believe every person should get checked by a chiropractor. Doesn't mean everybody needs extensive chiropractic care, and it doesn't mean that we're always the right chiropractic office for everybody, but we do believe that everybody should get checked for the functionality of their spine and making sure that everything is moving and aligned properly for health and longevity. So here's the spinal column. There are 24 vertebrae that make up the spinal column, and in between, as noted here in red, are the disc, the intervertebral disc. We hear people talk about the disc, right? It serves as an anchor point. It's a joint and it allows for movement, but it also allows for some dampening, which means that it shock absorbs from gravity. So when it comes to the health of the spine, the most important thing for the spine is mobility, is movement. Because nutrient transport, these discs, as we're going to talk about here in a second, these discs don't have a whole lot of vascular supply, so nutrients don't get put in there through vascular supply. What happens is this process called imbibition. Imbibition, I know a little bit of a funny word, but it basically is a change in pressure that allows nutrients to be sucked in to the disc. And what that looks like is it's like a sponge. If you want to fill a sponge with water or fluid, you squeeze it, you submerge it, and then you let go of it, and that negative pressure sucks the water in so that it fills up and gets hydrated. Same thing with the disc. We need range of motion, and not just partial range of motion, full range of motion to really squeeze the disc, and then as we straighten back up, it allows the nutrients to really be delivered to the disc. The disc is mostly cartilage. It has two basic layers. It has an outside layer, think of it like a donut, has an outside layer called the annulus fibrosus, and that's basically concentric rings of cartilage surrounding each other for stability. It basically makes it more stable, more steady, more secure. The inside is like the nucleus pulposus, and that is like the jelly filling of a donut. And what happens is, for there to be nutrient transport here, we need a good adequate amount of movement to keep the disc hydrated and healthy. If we don't move well, because of our inactivity levels, because of inflexibility, because of our posture, because we're sitting all day and we're allowing gravity just to compress and compress and compress, what happens is we don't hydrate the disc and get it nutrients, it becomes brittle. This annulus out here becomes brittle and it starts to flake a little bit and crack. Well, the problem with that is when this becomes dehydrated, it also shrinks in size, which then means you get decreased disc height, which is really the first characteristic of arthritis in the spine. Decreased disc height, then that dehydration also allows for this nucleus pulposus, this inner jelly material, to possibly bulge. If the outside annulus fibrosis is weak, then it's like a balloon where it can bulge out a little bit. You've heard of a bulging disc or a herniated disc. That's essentially what it is. It's this inner material trying to push its way through. Well, if it gets brittle enough, it can actually push all the way through and create a full herniation or even a sequestration where that piece breaks off and then it's just floating around, hopefully not in the spinal canal, but it can be in the spinal canal, interfering with the spinal cord itself. So this whole idea is really labeled immobilization degeneration. What that means is that our bodies degenerate if we don't use them. If you don't use it, you lose it. Well, it's not always just enough to move, to bend down, touch your toes, to do your stretching, to do yoga. Sometimes that's not enough. Sometimes you actually need to get into that fifth physiological barrier state where you do a grade 5 mobilization where it's actually taking the joint into a physiologic in range and a little bit beyond that. That's a chiropractic adjustment. That is movement on steroids, so to speak. I mean, that is just really amplifying the level of movement. Think of it, when we talk alignment, think of a door. If the door is off, right? If the door is not hung properly or the alignment's off, the hinges wear out. Well, what happens to those hinges? They erode, they rust, they just get nasty, right? They don't stay healthy because they're not lubricated well and they're not moving well. Well, same thing happens with the spine. Our bodies and brain is constantly trying to adapt to the environment. So as these bones get closer together, these vertebrae get closer together because the disc is dehydrated and it's shrinking in size, well, what ends up happening is our body sees that as a problem. And if it's not able to autocorrect or fix it, it just can't beat them, join them. It actually facilitates fusion. And what that means is your body starts throwing down these osteophytes. Osteophytes are bone spurs. I'm sure you've probably heard of bone spurs. What are bone spurs? Bone spurs are a compensation to altered movement. As the bones come closer together, it attracts to itself essentially, and basically what happens with arthritis is the body is trying to fuse the spine. How did all this happen? Well, it happened most of the time after years of inadequate movement, maybe neglect or just inadequate movement. There was tension in the spine that was never fully addressed. There was altered biomechanics, meaning the way that it moved was less than ideal. There was inefficiencies. So then the body then responds through what's called Wolff's Law. Wolff's Law basically says that our bodies are going to adapt to the demands that are placed on them. Or another way of saying it is the said principle. Wolff's Law is that bone will grow based on the demands you put on it. Think of like the old like Chinese traditions of like binding feet, right? Obviously not something that we necessarily want to talk about or support, but the whole idea is the binding of the feet is locking the bones in a specific place and making them grow that way. The said principle is that there's specific adaptations to impose demands, meaning as you put your body in a specific state, you are going to get better at that. It's habit, it's habitual. And so what ends up happening is as you move less, you move less. And it's this cycle that continues until you can't move at all because the bone spurs have now gone from being bone spurs and bony projections that are shooting off of the spine. Now you'll get one below and one above. And what will end up happening is they will fuse together and then you no longer have a joint there, right? So you hear things of like, I slipped a disc. You can't slip a disc. A disc doesn't slip or go anywhere. But what can happen is the nucleus pulposus can slide through, just like squeezing a tube of toothpaste. It can actually squeeze through. It can't do that on a healthy annulus fibrosus. If there's adequate movement and the disc is healthy, it cannot slip or herniate. That is a sign of some kind of dysfunction. Just like arthritis is not just overuse, it's not just trauma, and it's not just a disease of old age, because it starts when you're young. It starts young. It can even potentially start in childhood, and then it's that repetition of faulty movement patterns over time that your body compensates to, and some of those compensations are dehydration of the disc, which then can lead to lower nutrients, which can lead to other issues like bone spurs and eventually fusion. And so a lot of people think like, oh, I have this arthritis thing in my back because I'm getting old. Well, it's not necessarily that you're getting old, but time is a domain factor in that. And what that means is it's not necessarily your chronologic age. It's that the issue's been there for a long period of time, which is why we say everybody should get checked by a chiropractor. When is the best time to get checked by a chiropractor? Long before this stuff happens. Why? Because once this stuff happens, it's hard to get rid of. Sometimes impossible to get rid of. But keeping the spine mobile and moving freely and the disc hydrated well, this is really easy to prevent. It just takes a lifetime of care. It just takes being consistent over time and making good choices, because good choices have good consequences. So hopefully that gives you a little bit of understanding. I know we don't really talk a lot about arthritis. It's not something we see a lot in our office of because we're about 75% pediatrics. But it's a conversation that we do have because the kids that are under care are going to be much less likely to suffer from this from old age, even if their parents had it and their grandparents had it in generations and generations and generations beyond them. So hope is straight ahead. I hope this answers some of your questions. If you have any more questions about this specifically, please reach out to me. I'd love to help any way I can. All right, hope is straight ahead. Thanks so much. Bye.